Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're tackling the IDF today.
The Israel Defense Forces.
Right, and we're going way beyond the typical headlines, folks. You've given us a fascinating Wikipedia article to dig into.
It's a really good one, packed with details.
So let's jump right in. First thing that struck me, the IDF's history.
Yeah.
It goes way further back than I realized.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking pre-Israel even.
Exactly.
And like early 1900s, you have groups like Barjora, founded 1907.
Wow.
Hashhomer, just a couple of years later, 1909. These were Jewish communities realizing, hey, we need to protect ourselves.
Self-defense was essential, and you could see how that's built into the IDF even now.
Totally. It's not just a historical footnote. These groups paved the way for the Haganah in 1920, and that's the direct predecessor to the IDF we know today.
Direct lineage. Amazing. And speaking of today, the scale of the IDF is incredible. Almost 170,000 active personnel. And get this, over 465,000 in reserve.
That just shows you how they're structured. It's about being able to mobilize huge numbers very quickly if needed. It's fundamental to their strategy.
Makes sense, given the region they're in. But it's not all just one big block, right? There's so many ways to serve within the IDF.
Oh, tons. You've got regular service, obviously.
Right, what most people probably think of.
Yeah, then permanent service for career folks. But then there's the reserve, which we mentioned. And get this, programs like HESDR.
HESDR, what's that?
So imagine this, intensive religious study combined with your military service.
Wow, talk about a balance. That's fascinating.
Right. And it gets at the challenges the IDF has, like integrating Haredi men into service. Huge debate for years, court rulings, the whole thing.
Yeah, you see those tensions playing out. Makes you think, right? How do you balance deeply held beliefs with civic duty? Not an easy one.
No easy answers. And it's not just about religion. The roles of women, minorities in the IDF, whole other layer of complexity.
Right, like in recent years, haven't there been some big changes there?
Big time. Still debated, though. But it's interesting, right? The IDF, it's like a mirror to Israeli society as a whole.
Totally. All the same debates playing out.
Oh.
Okay, but shifting gears a bit, something a bit more, I don't know, exciting. Technology. The IDF has a serious reputation for being cutting edge.
Oh, yeah. And for good reason. The Merkava tank is like their poster child for innovation.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's entirely made in Israel. Right.
Yep. Designed and produced domestically. But it's more than just look what we can build. The Merkava prioritizes protecting the crew above all else.
That makes sense, given everything we just said. The value of human life. Trying to minimize casualties.
Exactly. It's about that balance again. Technological edge, but with a conscience, you know? And that's just one example.
Oh, right. Don't they have the Uzi, the Tavor?
Uzi, totally iconic. Tabor's newer, designed for tight urban fighting, you know?
Makes sense.
Then you've got the Spike missile system, world-renowned, and that's just scratching the surface, honestly.
We could do a whole deep dive on weaponry alone, I bet. But while we're on tech, we got to talk about, well, this is the stuff that seems like science fiction, the Iron Dome, right?
It's almost hard to believe it works as well as it does. Those short-range rockets, gone. Intercepted, incredible accuracy.
Like something out of a movie.
And they're not stopping there. David's sling, Iron Beam. The future of warfare is going to be very different.
It's mind-blowing, really.
It is, yeah. Though maybe a bit less high-tech, but still fascinating. Ever heard about the IDF's freeze-dried meals?
You mean like MREs?
Yeah, but these are water-activated. Apparently, the goulash is decent. Only in the IDF, right?
Right. But okay, on a more serious note, we can't talk about the IDF without talking about some of the, well, let's be honest, the controversies too. Their code of ethics, for example.
It's a fascinating document, really. International law, Israeli law, their Jewish heritage, it's all in there.
And it comes down to, what, 4 main values?
Yeah, defense, obviously. Love of homeland, human dignity, and stateliness.
Stateliness.
Yeah, it's about conducting yourself with dignity, honor, all that. But the tough part is, how do you square those ideals with the reality on the ground? You know, operating in one of the most complex parts of the world, it's a constant balancing act. Like the whole debate around targeted killings.
Right, the Dahiya doctrine and all
Oh,
that.
exactly. How do you weigh operational effectiveness against those core values? Not easy.
No easy answers there. And it's not just external conflicts, is it? Internally, the IDF has to grapple with all sorts of complexities too.
Oh, for sure.
Like we touched on, integrating different religious groups. And then there's the whole issue of women in combat roles.
You're right. Huge topic.
Yeah.
And what about integrating non-Jewish minorities like the Druze community? They serve, but it's its own whole thing.
Each one of those is probably a deep dive in itself, honestly. But on a slightly lighter note, I've got to ask, What's the deal with those loaf meat sausages they have? Are they really made from leftover hot dog bits, or is that just a myth?
You know, some things are better left to the imagination. Even I have my limits.
Huh, fair enough. Some culinary secrets should stay secret, I guess. But speaking of things that are a bit mysterious, let's talk about the future of the IDF.
All right, let's do it.
This is an organization that never seems to stand still. Technology's always evolving, warfare's changing, and the IDF seems to be on the front lines of all of it.
Absolutely. They're not just keeping pace, they're trying to set the pace. Like, take their small arms. They're phasing out the M16.
Really? I thought that was like the classic American rifle.
It is, but they're switching to the Tavor.
The Tavor, yeah.
It's made domestically, designed for the kind of close-quarters combat that the IDF often finds itself in. Plus, it's more about supporting their own industry, right? Makes sense.
Makes sense. So, smarter and more self-reliant.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual gear. They're putting serious resources into armored vehicles, too. The Namer and Eaton APCs, for instance.
Okay, yeah, those names ring a bell. Seen them in the news. They're pretty impressive, right?
Top of the line. Advanced armor, active protection systems can handle really rough terrain. They're built for 21st century warfare.
Active protection systems, what's that?
So basically, it's like a high-tech force field for tanks. It detects incoming threats like missiles or rockets and then neutralizes them before they can even reach the vehicle. The trophy system they developed in Israel. That's the prime example.
Wow, that sounds straight out of Star Wars.
Right. It's amazing, but it just goes to show you how the IDF is always adapting, always innovating.
But it's not just about the hardware, is it? At the end of the day, the IDF is made up of people, real people, with their own beliefs, backgrounds, and experiences.
Yeah, sure.
And they're constantly wrestling with that balance.
Yeah.
You know, staying effective in a fight, but also upholding those core values we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And as technology keeps advancing, those ethical and strategic questions are only going to get tougher.
Makes you wonder, what challenges are they going to face in the coming years, right?
Yeah.
The IDF, and really all militaries. What happens when the lines between conventional warfare and, everything else just get blurrier? Big questions.
Big questions. And honestly, questions that are going to keep being debated for years.
And that's kind of the point of these deep dives, isn't it? To explore those complex issues.
Absolutely. No easy answers, but it's about asking the right questions.
Exactly. And maybe making people think a little bit differently about things. But before we get too philosophical, makes you think a little bit differently about things, but before we get too philosophical, I've got to ask. It's about those IDF meals. The MREs, they're water activated, right?
Yeah, they are. Gotta love a bit of battlefield innovation, eh?
For sure. But, how bad are they really?
Bad is relative, They're meant to be functional, not fine dining.
Right. Survival first, taste buds later.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to do a taste test for a future episode, for science.
Now that's an episode I'd tune in for. But seriously, even with all we've covered, it feels like we've just scratched the surface of the IDF.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We've gone from these early self-defense groups, practically bare bones, to talking about laser weapons. And then there's the human side of it all, which is huge.
Yeah, it's not just about the tech, is it?
Not at all. We're talking about integration challenges, the ethics of warfare, how they adapt to a constantly changing world. It's fascinating.
It makes you realize the IDF isn't just about Israel, It reflects these massive questions that every country is dealing with, just in a very specific, very intense way.
100%. How do you balance security with personal liberty? How much does tradition matter when the world's moving so fast? Where's the line between using technology and, losing something human in the process?
It's almost philosophical when you think about it like that.
It is. And like you said, the IDF is grappling with these questions every single day. They don't have all the answers, but they're forced to confront these issues head on.
Okay, but to bring it back to a more, concrete example.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about women and minorities in the IDF. That's a perfect example of this, right?
Oh, absolutely. The role of women in combat, especially, that's been a huge shift even in recent years.
And it's still being debated, right? It's not like they found a solution everyone agrees on.
Exactly. And then you have the Druze community, which serves in the IDF, but their integration has its own whole unique history and set of considerations. It just highlights how there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to something as complex as military service in that part of the world.
It's like every layer we peel back, there's another layer underneath. But speaking of peeling back layers, remember how we were talking about the IDF always pushing technological boundaries? They're making some really interesting moves with their equipment.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like what?
Well, for one, they're phasing out the M16 rifle.
No way!
Did it-
Really? That's like the quintessential American rifle. Seemed like they used those forever.
I know, right? But they're switching over to the Tavor.
The Tavor, okay, I've heard good things.
It's domestically made, which makes sense from a self-reliance standpoint, but also apparently it's much better suited for the kind of close quarters combat situations the IDF often finds itself in, urban environments, that sort of thing.
So it's a practical choice as much as anything else.
Seems like it. And it's not just small arms either. They're investing heavily in armored vehicles too, the Namer and Eton APCs specifically.
Oh yeah, those are getting a lot of attention these days. Top of the line stuff, right?
Top of the line, we're talking advanced armor, all the latest tech. They even have these active protection systems built in.
Active protection, what's that do?
So picture this. A missile is streaking towards your tank.
Okay, not a good visual, but go on.
And suddenly, boom. This system detects it, neutralizes it before it can even hit. It's like a high-tech force field. The trophy system, which is an Israeli invention, that's the big one.
Whoa, so it's not just about having tough armor anymore, it's about disabling the threat completely. Wild.
It's like something straight out of a movie. Speaking of which, this next bit's going to sound like science fiction too. Remember how we talked about the Merkava tank being like their flagship?
Yeah, the pride of the IDF.
Well, get this. They're already working on its replacement.
Seriously, but the Merkava's still relatively new, isn't it? Why replace it so soon?
Because the future waits for no tank, I guess. No, but really, it's about staying ahead of the curve. This new generation, they're talking about lasers.
Lasers. You're kidding, right?
No, lasers, electromagnetic pulses, hybrid engines, the works, smaller crews, faster, even more protected than the Merkava. It's crazy.
Okay, now that is some serious future warfare stuff. So what you're saying is the tank of tomorrow, it's not just about being a heavily armed fortress on treads.
Sounds like it's going to be more about speed, agility, using tech to disable the enemy before they can even react.
Yeah.
And of course, keeping your crew as safe as possible in the process.
It makes sense when you think about it. The nature of war is changing so rapidly, you can't just rely on brute force anymore. But at the same time, you were saying earlier, all this tech doesn't change the fact that at the heart of it all are people.
Right, and all the messy, complicated things that come with that.
Exactly. So you've got this balancing act, right? Trying to be technologically dominant, but also ethically sound. Maintaining military readiness while navigating all the internal challenges that come with a diverse population.
It's a lot to handle, to say the least. And honestly, it makes me wonder, what does all this mean for the future?
What do you mean?
Well, if the IDF, with all its resources and focus on innovation, is having to adapt this quickly, what does that mean for other militaries around the world? What happens when the lines between traditional warfare, cyber warfare, terrorism, all of it, just become more and more blurred?
Big questions, for sure.
Big and maybe a little unsettling. Big and maybe a little unsettling.
Yeah.
But hey, that's the world we live in, right?
Hmm.
Always changing. Speaking of which, got one more question that's been bugging me. Those water-activated MREs, were those really as bad as people say?
Honestly, bad is subjective, you know? They're not trying to win any Michelin stars over there. It's about efficiency.
Right, fuel for the mission, not fancy dinners. Still, maybe someday we'll have to try them out, for a future episode. Purely in the name of research, of course.
I'd be up for that field trip. But jokes aside, even with all this talk about lasers and tanks, it feels like we've only scratched the surface here. The IDF, it's way more than just a military, isn't it?
That's what's really hit home for me. We started with these early self-defense groups, barely any resources, and now we're talking cutting-edge tech, ethical debates that could fill textbooks. It's a lot.
It really is, but it's not just the quantity of information, it's that it all connects to these huge questions every country is dealing with right now.
Exactly. How do you balance security with individual freedom? How much do you hold on to tradition when the world's changing so fast? It's like the IDF is a case study in all that.
Totally. And it shows you there's no easy answers. But maybe just trying to understand it better, that's a good first step.
Well said. Well, folks, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive for today.
Time flies when you're dissecting geopolitical realities.
That it does. But seriously, thanks to everyone for joining us on this journey. Until next time.
See you then.
And remember, keep those Wikipedia links coming.